Hello, and welcome back to the studio. I'm Dr. Wiggo, and today we're going to talk about the new iPhone 16e that they announced this week. Now, as always, I'll start with what Apple announced. So if you watch the event, then you can skip over the next chapter because that's just going to be me rehashing what Apple said. For those of you who didn't watch, it'll just be a review. But the chapter after that, I'm going to talk about all the things Apple didn't announce, but were there if you knew where to look. About the differences between the 16e and the 16 and a bunch of other things. But then in the chapter after that, I'm going to put on my day job hat of a strategic management professor. I have spent years studying Apple, and I will tell you what I think about some of the strategies involved in this phone and this launch, and some other stuff that Apple has going on that I think may have a lot of implications for the future. So you may want to stick around for that. But first, let's just run back over what Apple announced on Wednesday. So the iPhone 16e, which is the replacement for the iPhone SE, which has been their budget phone for like several years. The latest one's the third generation. So this would be the fourth generation, except it's not an SE. It's a 16e, which puts it into the 16 family. And they start off right away by saying it has the A18 processor, which is the same one in the 16 and the 16 Pro. Whoa, that's pretty cool. But then they went on to announce the C1 modem. Yes, Apple's doing their own modem, and this has a lot of implications that I'll get to in the strategy section at the end of the video. Now, they said because the C1 modem is Apple Silicon and is much more power efficient, that enabled longer battery life. But they also redesigned the insides of the phone and put in a larger battery. So larger battery and this C1 modem improvements means it's got the longest battery life of any iPhone. The main reason they probably dropped the SE name and went with the 16e was to let you know that it was all about Apple Intelligence and that this phone will support Apple Intelligence, which if you've watched Apple's ads is all they talk about, even though a lot of it's not available yet. There is some available, and it will work on this phone. And when the new stuff comes out, like the Smart Siri that we've been waiting on forever, finally gets here, it will run on this phone. So this is a big upgrade. The 16e also has an action button, which you can use for visual intelligence. Because on the 16 and the 16 Pro, you use the camera control button to activate Apple Intelligence, and this phone doesn't have a camera control button, but they'll let you use the action button to go into visual intelligence, where you can just point the phone at something and it'll tell you what it is or create an event. It's very powerful, and it's available now. This isn't one of those future things. They've really updated the camera from the iPhone SE because this has the same 48 megapixel main camera, fusion camera, that's on the 16 and 16 Pro. Because it's a 48 megapixel sensor, you can zoom in 2 times. So basically get the 12 megapixels at the center of the sensor, which is the same as the previous SE, which was a 12 megapixel camera. So you can have the same at a double zoom, or you can have 48 megapixels at the full frame. And it also supports portrait mode, but only when you're taking the picture. On the 16 and the 16 Pro, you can go back and take a photo you'd already taken and put it into portrait mode through AI or some kind of processing. But this one, it's when you're doing it, you can do it, but not later. The 16e supports 4K video up to 60 frames per second in Dolby Vision, the same as its bigger brothers. And in a big departure from the SE, this is Face ID, not Touch ID. The home button's gone, the fingerprint sensor is gone from the SE. This is a iPhone 16. It's Face ID. The 16e also has the ceramic shield coating on the glass, although it's not as good as the one on the 16 and the 16 Pro. And it supports the satellite messaging that was introduced previously on the 16. So even when you're out of a cellular service area, you can still send emergency messages, and Find My and all those kind of things will still work via satellite. And no, it's not Starlink, so you don't have to worry you're not supporting Elon Musk if you're one of those people. And all of this for only $599. $599? The SE was $429. Yeah, we're going to come back to that when I get to my analysis at the end. But for now, let's just move on to what Apple left out in order to get the price down from the $799 of the iPhone 16 to the $599 of the 16e. The first is that improved ceramic shield. This has the older version of the ceramic shield. It's still better than glass, but it's not as much better as its bigger brothers. They also left out MagSafe and Qi 2 charging, which is a big deal because Qi 1 wireless charging only does 7.5 watts, so it would take a long time to charge. Although it is USB, so you can get fast charging, just not wirelessly. The dynamic island isn't there. You get a notch like the older iPhones. The display. Yes, it's an OLED screen like its bigger brothers, but it's only 800 nits as opposed to the 1,000 nits of the bigger brothers, and 1,200 nits peak brightness versus 1,600 for its bigger brothers, and 2,000 outdoors for the big brothers. And the 1 nit minimum brightness of the 16 and 16 Pro, not a thing. You can't get that dim. Now about that A18 processor. Yes, it is the A18 processor, but whereas the 16 Pro has 6 GPU cores and the 16 has 5 GPU cores, this is an even further binned processor that only has 4 GPU cores. So the screen won't be as snappy. You probably won't notice unless you're a gamer, and then you'll notice a lot because the games won't run quite as well. Oh, I already mentioned that portrait mode was live only, and the photographic styles which are available are the older set. The 16 and 16 Pro have more advanced photographic styles. Spatial photos are out because you only have a single camera and you need 2 cameras to do spatial video, so that makes sense. Cinematic mode, which is available on the bigger brothers, not available here when you're shooting video. And mmWave 5G, the millimeter wavelengths, is not supported by the C1 modem chip. So if you happen to live in a big city where that's available, you won't get those super high speeds. But most of us don't live in cities like that anyway. So this isn't as big a deal. What is a bigger deal, the ultra-wideband chip is also missing from this phone, which is the one you use for that zeroing in on Find My Things and AirTags and all that stuff. So they left out quite a bit to get that price down $200 from the 16, but then they redesigned the insides. Let me put on my business school professor hat. I'm a huge fan of economies of scale. And by making this a 16, where they're reusing things like screens and a lot of the components, they're getting more economies of scale, which will then help make this phone cheaper, but it will also make the 16 and 16 Pro cheaper. Well, to Apple, not to us. But then they do the redesign of the interior and this new modem chip, and so that runs the cost back up. I'm not sure what they're doing here. I do know what they're doing with this C1 modem. To say that the relationship between Apple and Qualcomm is rocky is a bit of an understatement. They pretty much hate each other. And Apple pays Qualcomm about $8 billion a year, which is almost 20% of Qualcomm's revenues for their modems. But Qualcomm is making the Snapdragon chip, which is used in all the other high-end smartphones, so they're a direct competitor. It's like when Apple used to buy a bunch of stuff from Samsung, when Samsung was their big competitor. They've resourced some of that stuff, and now it looks like they're going to resource the modem, which will be a big deal for Apple, get them out of that Qualcomm trap, but a horrible thing for Qualcomm because they stand to lose up to 20% of their business. But I appreciate that strategy, Apple, because that's a smart move, because Apple way overpays for those modems. Qualcomm had like a hammerlock on it. That's why Apple, a few years back, went and bought Intel's modem business for like $1 billion and brought all those people that came with it from that division, and they have been working on this for years, and this is the first one. And here's another key part of their strategy. They're trying it out in a lower risk platform. Don't introduce it in your high-end phones. Introduce it in your lowest-end phone, which this now is because the SE's gone. And then you can fine-tune it and tweak it. I saw a thing that it uses both the TSMC 4 nanometer and 7 nanometer process. So they haven't even refined this. So once they get going, they'll be able to really refine it and get even more economies of scale and get even more power reduction. This is a big deal, and they get to try it out on a phone that's lower risk for them if it doesn't work that well because, well, it's a cheap phone. It's not a cheap phone. In fact, that's what I'm going to talk about next. This is where I get confused because Apple has 27% of the worldwide smartphone market and almost 58% of the smartphone market in the United States. That's all well and good, but that's primarily been with high-end phones and with the iPhone SE, which is a mid-range phone. In fact, being professorial, low-end smartphones are under $200, and there aren't very many of them, and they're not very good. That's why they're under $200. Mid-range is $200 to $500, and that is the sweet spot, and that is the segment with the highest sales worldwide. Most people in the world buy phones that cost between $200 and $500. Well, Apple had one, the SE, at $429. Now, most of those people in the rest of the world are buying Android phones, but Apple had a phone at that price point, but now they don't. Now they're in the premium only category, which is phones over $500. And again, the highest sales are in that mid-range. So they are going to give up sales. They're going to lose sales to Android for price-conscious buyers, for people who say, I'm just not going to go over $500. And the beauty of the SE at $429 was even with tax and stuff, it was still under $500. But this phone is $600. And as soon as you add tax and that, you're hitting $700. Well, now you're getting close to the $800 of the 16. And why wouldn't you just trade up? Maybe that's their strategy. Maybe they're introducing this cheap phone, which isn't really a cheap phone, but for people that are just looking for an iPhone and they go into an Apple store and say, I want the cheapest iPhone, well, this is it. And it's $600, which will be disappointing to a lot of people, but they might still buy it. But what a lot of people are going to do is look at it and say, well, for $200 more, I get a way better phone. So I don't know. This could go either way. Personally, I think it's going to work against them. I think they're giving up that huge mid-range market, which again is the bulk of smartphone sales are in that mid-range. And they're just giving it up. They're saying, we're not going to do that. Maybe later this year when they bring out the iPhone 17, they'll drop the 16E down a price, or will they introduce a 17E? What's going to happen? We won't know. The SE was being recycled roughly every 3 years or so. So are they going to refresh this one every year? Is there going to be a 17E? I don't know. So that's kind of my take on it. I think they're making a mistake. I think they're going to lose sales. Now, Apple has never reported sales by model, so you can't know which proportion of their sales were the iPhone SE, and maybe they said it was a small enough thing, and maybe their profits weren't quite as high because, they got to get those 35% margins. That's how Apple works. They figure out how much, and then they add on their 35% Apple tax, and that's their price. I don't know what to tell you. I know one thing. I won't be buying one. Not even to show off on the channel because I have a phone. I have a 16 Pro Max. I'm good to go. But for entry-level people, maybe. But again, the entry level has moved up $160. All the rumors said it was going to be $500. And that would have made perfect sense. $499, they're still in that $200 to $500 range. But no, they jumped another $100 to put in all this extra stuff. I don't know. I guess we'll see. But that's it for today. That's all I have to say about the 16E. It's a good phone. It's just so close to the iPhone 16, $200 less, but the difference between $429 and $800 was a huge difference. $600 and $800, not so much. So we'll just have to wait and see how the sales turn out, which of course Apple won't tell us. We'll just have to wait and let all the rumor mongers start speculating because they seem to have sources in other places where they can find out how many of these things they sold. I don't know. But that's all I have to say about the 16E. Next week, the Tablet enclosure finally arrives. So that will be the video next week. I'll be unboxing that and testing it out. and see if it works with the Gen 5 SSD, which none of the others have. I don't think it will either, but hope springs eternal. So that'll be next week. So that's it for today. Thanks for stopping by. See you next time with the Trebleet. Bye-bye. I'm just going to go start preparing that video now. Thanks for staying to the end. Bye-bye.